Good morning, everyone. We're running slightly behind. The sermon was kind of long-winded this morning. You know how these people go on and on. But anyway, we want to finish up chapter 14 of Numbers. This is like the fourth rebellion that we've seen. Remember, this is where the spies come back. They report that the land is essentially a death trap, emphasizing all the negatives, forgetting the positives, forgetting God's promise. They want to dump Moses. They want to go back to Egypt because it was such a great place. And so that happens. This is how the story ends, and how it ends is important. I just want to say one or two things about it. Then we'll go on to Numbers 15. So here's how the story ends. And the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing up a bad report about the land. The man who brought up the bad report about the land died by plague before the Lord. So look out. Of those men who went up to spy out the land, only Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive. When Moses told these words to all the people of Israel, the people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the heights of the hill country and said, "Here we are, we will go up to the place that the Lord has promised, for we have sinned." But Moses said, "Why are you transgressing the command of the Lord, when that will not succeed? Do not go up, for the Lord is not among you, lest you be struck down before your enemies. For there were the Amalekites and the Canaanites facing you, and you shall fall by the sword because you have turned back from following the Lord. The Lord will not be with you." And this is really key. But they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country. And although neither the ark of the covenant nor the Lord nor Moses departed out of the camp, and the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that country came down and defeated them and pursued them even to Hormah. So notice what happens here. This is kind of an interesting story, noticing the way it ends, right? So one of the things they do here that disables them from being the people of God, right, is they give up hope. And when they give up hope, they basically degenerate into a fear-driven people, right? They become totally driven by their own fears. And now they've repented, and that's good, but they haven't repented in the right way. So, there are different ways you can repent, right? One way to repent, and this is probably the best way, is to say, yes, I did the wrong thing. I sinned. And now, Lord, please show me the way forward. Okay? But that's not what they do. They, in effect, say to Moses, and you have to kind of get the right kind of intonation here. All right, if the Lord wants us to go to the promised land, we'll go to the promised land, for goodness sakes. And so they march forward. That is, they still don't have it quite right? They still don't really trust God. And they're moving forward largely out of a sense of kind of like resentment and anger. Okay, so we're learning something really important, like two of the most fundamental disablers of faith are fear and anger. Okay? Fear and anger will sort of like corrupt and rot away the roots of faith. And notice 1444 notices that they presumed to go into the promised land without God being with them. So that's how that incident ends. Now, let's take a look at Numbers 15. Numbers 15 seems to be an interruption, because Numbers 15 there's no narrative in Numbers 15. So as you probably have noticed by now, right, the Old Testament, mainly the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, is sort of like a mixture of narrative and law. They kind of like alternate. So, narrative story, then law, then some more narrative, and then some more law. So we've got law here. And the question is, why is this law here in this place? Is it just kind of like a random thing? And I think the answer is no, because one of the things that we're about to learn in Numbers 15 is we're going to learn about how to avoid rebelling against God. And there's one word that basically summarizes how to do that. It's an old word, and that's one of the reasons why I like it. I'm trying to kind of like bring it back. Numbers 15 is about something that's very important for the Old Testament, and that's this word piety. Piety. And what that means is this: piety has to do with how we regard God. So to be pious, to be a person of piety, is to have kind of like a deep and abiding reverence, awe, respect, and devotion toward God. Okay, so Numbers 15 is about piety, and the idea right here is that a people who have inculcated a sense, right, of reverence, respect, devotion, and awe for God, right, those folks are going to pretty well stay on the right path. That's the key to not rebelling against God, is to be educated in piety. So let's take a look at what this piety involves. So first of all, let's take a look at Numbers 15, 1 through 16, which has to deal with sacrifices. I'll read part of it to you, and then I'll just say a few things about it. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land you are to inhabit," notice this, when you come into the land you are to inhabit, not if, but when you come into the land you inhabit, which I am giving you. And notice this, when you come to the land that you are to inhabit, that I am giving to you. Okay, you can see where this is coming from. And you offer the Lord from the herd or from the flock a food offering or a burnt offering or a sacrifice to fulfill a vow or a free will offering, or at the appointed feast to make a pleasing aroma to the Lord. That when he brings you his offering, he shall offer it to the Lord, a grain offering, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, mixed with 1/4 hin of oil. And you shall offer with the burnt offering, or for the sacrifice, 1/4 hin of wine, a drink offering for each lamb. Or for a ram you shall offer a grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of flour, mixed with 1/3 hin of oil. And for the drink offering, you shall offer 1/3 of a hin of wine, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And when you offer a bull as a burnt offering or a sacrifice to fulfill a vow, or for a peace offering to the Lord, then one shall offer with the bull a grain offering of 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour, mixed with 1/2 hin of oil. Now, we don't need to go into the details of all that, because one basic point is being made here. And that is, we're returning to the idea of offering as a way of inculcating piety. So let's take just a brief look at this. So we've already talked a little bit about the burnt offering when we walked through Leviticus. Remember what the burnt offering was? You took an animal and you put it on the altar of burnt offering, and the thing was like completely combusted. And the idea there, right, was the burnt offering was a symbol, a visible symbol of your complete self-giving to God. In other words, it was a way of saying, look, here I am, God, take me, I'm all yours, right? Do with me as you wish. So there's that. And then, as the people go into the promised land, right, the land's going to produce things. And so we have this grain offering, drink offering, and peace offering. And that's by way of reminding the people of Israel, look, the reason why you have these things to offer is because you're inhabiting the land that I gave you. Okay, that is, notice what's going on here. On one hand, right, the burnt offering inculcates this sense that we're to give the whole of ourselves to God. And all these other offerings, which come from the produce of the land, right, they're to remind us of why we need to be thankful to God, because he's given us the lamb. And here's the idea, right? If we're really focused on offering ourselves to God, and if we really are aware and thankful of his blessings, that's the path to true piety. Okay? A people that's thinking like that is not going to rebel. Okay? A people that's focused on giving themselves to the service of God, and a people that's aware of all the blessings they've received and are constantly reminding themselves of that, right? that's going to be a people who will obey and follow God, not grudgingly, but happily and even joyfully. And that's the goal. Okay, that's the goal with all this that's being described. One final thing, later on in this chapter, in verses 17 through 21, we have yet another offering, and it's this is an interesting offering, and it's what you might call the dough offering, literally an offering of dough. So, you kind of wonder why are we offering dough? Well, once again, right? Remember where the doughs come from. You wouldn't have any of that dough were it not for the wheat that was produced by the land that God gave you. So notice what's going on here. Bread, and this should be very meaningful to us who receive the Eucharist every Sunday, right? Bread becomes a visible sign of God's goodness and graciousness to his people, right? We have this bread in front of us because of God's goodness. And we'll just want to keep that in mind, right? It's not coincidental that bread becomes so central to the Eucharist because in the minds of Israel, right, bread was in many ways the fundamental, basic symbol of God's goodness and generosity. Okay, so that's the significance of the dough offering. Another way to think about this is that, right, the people of Israel are being reminded, look, whenever you sit down to eat a meal, you may complain about what you're eating, right? Maybe whoever cooked dinner that night didn't do the greatest job, or, maybe you're eating at Panera, or, maybe you're eating, leftovers from 3 nights ago that you didn't particularly like when they were fresh cooked anyway. I always joke that I think that my wife somehow trying to figure out a way for us to have leftovers every night, which somehow will mean that she never cooks. And if anybody can do that, it's her. But anyway, the idea here is you're sitting down, right, and whatever you happen to think about what you're about to eat, right, the thing you need to remember is don't take that thing for granted, right? That's the idea. Be grateful for what you are about to eat. That's one of the reasons why, grace at meals is really important, right? It's a way of saying, you know what? Thank you for what we're about to receive. So that's the dough offering. Now, we also have a section here that's on intentional and unintentional sin. So let me read to you part of the section on unintentional sins. This is Numbers 15, 22 and following. Notice it's important there's a distinction between sins that are committed unintentionally and sins that are committed intentionally. And the two have a very different status. So here it is. But if you sin unintentionally and do not observe all the commandments that the Lord has spoken to Moses, all that the Lord has commanded you by Moses, from that day that the Lord has commanded, and onward throughout your generations, then, if it was done unintentionally, without the knowledge of the congregation, all the congregation shall offer one bull from the herd for a burnt offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And its grain offering and its drink offering according to the rule, and one male goat for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for all the congregation, for the people of Israel, that they shall be forgiven because it was a mistake. So notice what happens here. The people of Israel make some unintentional violation of the law, and there's a provision for dealing with it. But notice here, it's really important. Although the sin was unintentional, nobody really meant to commit it. Nevertheless, it needs to be called to the whole people's attention, right? Yes, we did this. It was wrong. We didn't mean to do it, but we did what was wrong, and we need to own up to it. And part of owning up to it means offering a series of sacrifices. We offer our burnt offering to turn ourselves back to God, and then we offer a sin offering, right? And what we're doing is we're simply reminding ourselves of just how serious sin is, even if it was unintentional, okay? We're trying to hold before us the fact that when we sin, right, we're not just like breaking a rule or violating some principle of etiquette or something like that, we're sinning against God. And that's serious, whether it was done intentionally or unintentionally. And so we're trying to call ourselves back because, right, the thing that, and the Old Testament I think is working with a wonderful insight here. The problem with sin, well, one of the problems with sin, there are many problems with sin, but one of the problems with sin, right, is that sin tends to have like a blinding effect, right? It's almost like, you do one thing and you don't really think about it, and then you kind of do like that same thing again, and it becomes easier each time, right? A little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And then, you end up at that point, right, where the sinful thing actually now feels to you natural. And then the rationalization sets in, right? Well, it really wasn't serious and nobody was really hurt by it. And, everybody does it and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then we've rationalized sin, right? So this is a way of trying to prevent unintentional sin from becoming sort of like habitual sin. Done all the time, done all the time, done all the time. We just don't think about it. So there's the aspect of piety here, right, is it's really important to recognize that when we sin, we're sinning against God, and that's serious, right? So we have to be aware of that and find ways to correct ourselves. Now, there's a second kind of sin, and that's the sin that's intentional, and just that is actually described very briefly in Numbers 15:30 and following. But the person who does anything, and I like this expression, but the person who does anything with a high hand, okay, whether he is native or a sojourner, reviles the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord. Now, what's going on here? Well, it's something like this. It's like, this is intentional sin, okay? This is, I know it's wrong, and I know that we've been told not to do it, but you know what? I don't care. I'm going ahead. This is sin with a high hand, right? This is like, it's not just, I'm kind of like, well, it's wrong, and, I kind of like feel guilty about doing it. This is, I'm doing it because I want to do it. And I'm going to move ahead. This is the way things are going to be. And so the penalty here is that, in this case, right, the person who commits an intentional sin in a high-handed way, this person is to be cut off from the people of Israel. This person is no longer a member of God's covenant people, right? And I think it's really important to kind of understand what's going on here. It's not simply that the people of Israel kind of all got together and said, Joe here did this, this, and this. He did it all intentionally, knew it was wrong. Let's vote him off the island. That's not what's going on here. The idea is that by sinning intentionally, by doing what he knew to be wrong, this person has expelled him or herself from the covenant people, right? They've displayed by their actions and also by what's going on up here that they really don't want to be part of God's covenant people. Now, I think one way to understand this, and I think this maybe helps things a little bit, is there's an instance in 1 Corinthians 5 where Paul's talking about some people in the Corinthian congregation who have sinned with a high hand, right? They've done a number of things. We don't need to go into what they are. But they've kind of knowingly done things that are wrong. And Paul says, okay, you need to expel these people from the church. This is where we get our term excommunication, right? And Paul's point, right, is once again, not that, okay, you need to just like throw them out. It's that by the way that they've chosen to live and by the mentality they've adopted, they've shown that they've cut themselves off from the church, right? They do not understand themselves to need to live a Christian life. They've cut themselves off from the church. And it's important, right, that this become clear. And this is kind of where the modern church tends to kind of fall down, right? It's not loving or charitable or helpful to sort of like overlook people who are kind of living in wrong ways by saying, well, so-and-so, we don't want to be judgmental or narrow-minded. Let's ignore it. What that does, right, is it simply allows the problem to go on unaddressed and uncorrected. Okay, so in Paul's case, right, the purpose of excommunication is to kind of bring someone to the awareness of how serious what they've done is. Okay, so it's actually intended for a positive and good purpose. It's almost like, you've gone to see your doctor, right, and the doctor's discovered something awful wrong with you. And they said, if I tell him what's really wrong with him, he's going to be really upset. So I'm not going to say anything. Okay? I'm going to quickly hold up the x-rays and then we'll put them away. And I'll tell him, you know what? You're fine. Okay? In reality, right, you have 1 year to live, but I'm going to tell you you're just fine. Once again, that's not helping anybody, right? That's what we're dealing with here. So another form of piety, let's take sin seriously and let's own up to it. Now, here's another thing. This is concerning the Sabbath in Numbers 15:32. Here we have where we come back to the Sabbath. And here what happens is that someone is discovered gathering wood on the Sabbath. They consult Moses about what's to be done. And God says this person is to be stoned, and so that's actually what happens. So what's going on here? What's really important to remember, right? And we've seen this in Exodus, we've seen it in Numbers, we'll see it again in the book of Deuteronomy. That is, it's really important to remember, right? The Sabbath is an institution of God. It's not just a day of the week. And the idea right here is that keeping the Sabbath is one of the ways that the people of Israel honor God. And they honor God in a kind of interesting way, right? You honor God by actually getting recharged yourself. Okay, it's interesting the way that it works out, right? So the idea here is that the keeping of the Sabbath, honoring it as a day of rest, honoring it as a day where, your normal sort of pattern of work just is like put aside for this period of time and honoring God. The idea is this is not to be violated or treated lightly, because once again, it's not just breaking a rule, it's actually dishonoring God. So the guy out there, may have thought, hey, what's the difference? I'm going to go out and gather firewood, nobody's going to be hurt. Even if anybody finds that, there'll be no damage done. Moses here points out what's really going on, right? This person has in effect said, look, God, I don't really care what you intend the Sabbath to look like. I need to gather some wood, and that's what I'm going to do. What you think about the matter is unimportant to me. So, once again, piety here involves honoring those things that God has instituted, particularly, right, when the thing's been instituted for our benefit. Okay? And it's really important here to remember, right? So far as we know, the people of Israel were the only people in the whole history of the world who had a Sabbath. Okay? For all of human history, for a long time before the invention of the modern weekend, right? In most societies, work took place from sunup to sundown, 7 days a week, unless there was some great religious holiday, and then you might have gotten a break. So Israel's unique in this respect, and this is just a way of saying, right, this too is a form of piety, right? It's piety that impinges on daily life, which is actually the most important kind of piety, right? That actually changes what you do. One final thing, and this once again may seem not all that important either. The last thing that happens in chapter 15 is this. This is 15:37. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. It shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord and to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you were inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. Now, once again, this may sound kind of even like almost kind of trivial or even like kind of kooky, right? People of Israel are to put these kind of special tassels on their garments. At the corners, the tassels are supposed to be blue, and there's a reason for that. The blue tassels remind them, the people of Israel, that they're royalty, right? You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You may be slaves who escaped from Egypt, but because of the covenant that I've made with you, you are a royal people. So put those blue tassels on your garments and remember who you are. Oh, and by the way, put other tassels on there as well to remind you of my commandments. Now, once again, I think this is really important. That is, God here has some insight into the human heart. He says, do not follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. That is, God knows, right, that as sinners, our sort of inclination is to follow along with what we think is best. And that sometimes it can be really helpful to have like physical, like concrete reminders around us. To remind ourselves, right, that actually that's not our standard, okay? As Christians, right, our standard is not what I felt or I thought might be a really wonderful thing. Okay? That's not the standard. And we kind of need to be reminded of that periodically. So let me give you an instance of this. I'm looking at one right now. It's the big wooden thing by the door over there, the baptismal font. So every Sunday, right, we fill it with blessed water, and you may see people going by it, right, and they'll put their hand in the water, and they'll make the trace sign of the cross on their torso, right? That's a physical reminder, right, that I've been baptized into Jesus' death and resurrection, and therefore, right, my baptism defines who I am. It's my primary identity, okay? And I need to be reminded of that like over and over and over and over. Another good example of this from a number of traditions, but one of the things that both in Anglicanism and also in Roman Catholicism is that there's the tradition that during Holy Week, that week preceding Easter, that all the priests in a diocese get together and reaffirm their ordination vows. Because, and this may come as a shock, right? Sometimes, right, people kind of get into the grind of parish ministry and they can forget what they're really supposed to be doing. That never happens here. Because all the priests that work here are so wonderful and lovely and spiritual. We never have to worry about anything like that here. But it does occur some places, so it's really important, right? But once again, it's the idea, right, that we need like physical and concrete things that will sort of like keep us on the right path, right? It might be a cross or a crucifix placed in a room somewhere. It might be an open Bible. It might be a candle. It might be any number of things, right? But these physical things inculcate, a sense of piety and devotion. And because they do that, they're important, or at least they can be. Okay, now let me set up chapter 16. We won't be able to really get into it, but let me just say a few things about it, and then we will dive into it next Sunday. So in number 16, we have another big rebellion, right? Okay. Chapter on piety ignored, big rebellion. And so let's take a look at, let me give you a foretaste of what the rebellion is. This time the rebellion comes from a man by the name of Korah, K-O-R-A-H. And Korah is a Levite. And Korah makes two mistakes. First of all, he comes to Moses and Aaron and says, look, you two, have just kind of like exalted yourselves in front of Israel. And you guys are no better than I am. And therefore, right, I should be stepping into your place because I'll probably do a better job than you two. Okay, so thing number one, Korah tells Aaron and Moses that they have exalted themselves, when in fact, of course, we know they've been exalted by God. So he's wrong on that score. Second thing, we'll find this out, we'll see this next Sunday. Korah then decides that what he wants is, he's discontent with being a Levite, now he wants to be a priest. And the reason why he wants to be a priest is this. He thinks that becoming a priest is sort of like a promotion. He's sort of like climbing Israel's religious ladder, and thinks that once he becomes a priest, right, he's going to get a corner office, a designated parking space, and a pension. Okay, that's essentially what he thinks is going to happen. So Korah manifests another problem that can occur among God's people, right? We've seen ingratitude, we've seen disobedience, we've seen lack of thanksgiving, loss of hope. Now we see something else. And that is the refusal or failure to trust genuine leaders. This becomes another problem for the people of Israel, right? And we see this in the person of Korah. So we'll take a look at next Sunday at how all this gets worked out. I'll say this maybe by way of getting things started, right? I think in many ways, right, in the church today, there's something of a crisis of leadership. Not that there aren't good leaders around, there certainly are. But the problem, right, is that we've got like a sort of a double problem, right? On one hand, right, there have been enough important leaders within recent memory who have undergone like massive failures in different churches all the way around the country, right? And so what that does, right, it tends to sort of induce a kind of mentality of cynicism about all leaders, right? Oh, they must be hiding something. There's probably something going on here that, I don't know, that kind of thing. On the other hand, right, there are also good leaders, and the idea here, right here, is if God's people are going to accomplish their mission, right, they really need to heed good leaders. So we've got this double problem of, right, leaders who failed, creating an atmosphere of cynicism about all leaders, when in fact we actually need genuine leaders who really will lead the people of God. So leadership is an important issue, and it may be comforting or even discomforting, depending on how you look at it, that the issue of leadership was present right from the beginning and is still with us today. So at this moment, we're working on a process for training and raising up perfect leaders. And when we finish working all that out, I'll let you know what it is.